Welcome to Alumni Connections. I'm here with the fabulous, the amazing Michael Taylor, and we're actually in person. So COVID world slowly coming to the end here. We still got the challenges of the world, and still we'll be doing virtual interviews because it's easy for everybody. But Michael Taylor was kind and gracious enough to actually visit me here in my office to do this interview today. Now, Michael, thank you for being here.
Oh, an absolute pleasure, Cap. Absolute pleasure.
So I know Michael Taylor because we had this 40th anniversary party honoring Randolph, the alumni, the legacy, and in particular, Miss Lottie Taylor, who was, correct me if I'm wrong, founding principal of Randolph, or at least like
founding in the building that it currently is.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah.
But she, I mean, when anybody talks about Lottie Taylor, I mean, that seems to me, at least from people's frame of reference, the beginning of A. Philip Randolph, especially as I know it, I was just talking before we jumped on camera, 1996 is when I joined. And so when anybody was talking about the founding of the school, Lottie Taylor's name was brought up with that. You've been an assistant principal. You have a lot of different skill sets you bring to the table. DJing, we're going to hear about them all today. But you were there at that 40th anniversary dinner. And I think anybody that knows you're an outspoken guy, you're a political guy, you're somebody that brings the heat, brings the energy. So I know we're going to get into that today. I'm really excited to talk to you and get a lot more information about your story, share that information with folks that are excited to hear about the pieces of that go along with the Randolph legacy, as well as connecting alumni, which is what we're here to do. So tell us about what you're doing right now, and then we'll get into the backstory.
Well, I've been working pretty much 7 days a week for the last 7-8 months on two specific projects. One was a bakery that I invested in, and trying to see that bakery reopen after COVID. And
where's that bakery?
It's 740 Bergen Street. It's in Brooklyn. The bakery is doing great now.
What's the name of the bakery so people can support it?
A magical name, Black-owned bakery, the Bakery on Bergen.
Bakery on Bergen.
Yes, and really a fantastic place to go to get some great food. We had to reimagine it because coming out of, this is back in March, and trying to say, well, how are you going to open? How are you going to figure out the rules associated with it? How are you going to get a new clientele? There's nobody here on the street.
Right.
We made the discovery that there were many more people working from home. We expanded our connections to places like Grubhub and Uber Eats and got a vigorous delivery business going. But most bakeries, tend to function well based upon cakes, and it all becomes a formula. You get 7-8 cake orders in a week. That's in the hundreds, along with the smaller orders, and all of a sudden you're $200 a day, $300 a day can become a $400 to $500 a day.
That's
business,
amazing.
And we're really proud to see that take off. And after that, I had another friend who had made some investments up in Syracuse where she owned some property, and she got hit with COVID really hard because she was Airbnb-ing this beautiful brownstone in Brooklyn, and then all of the reservations got canceled. She was literally, it was booked out for 18 months, and they were all canceled. They were mostly international reservations. And so she had this property that she had purchased, and her plan was to develop that property. And all of a sudden that development became the core central thing that absolutely needed to get done. So that basically, the bank wouldn't come in, default on anything. And I spent a lot of time up in Syracuse, New York, and learned some very interesting things. Like, when a contractor tells you, well, when I was in the property on Sunday, and I'm sitting there saying, you were at the property on Sunday. Interesting, because I was there Friday night where there was an attempted break-in and decided to stay there overnight. And then it snowed on Saturday. So I'm really curious as to how you got into the property, because there were no footprints in the snow showing that you actually went into the property. And what that little conversation revealed was, one, he wasn't being truthful, but more importantly, he really could not recruit people to come in to do work in the middle of the winter on the property, and wasn't being honest about that. And to me, it all boils down to anytime you're dealing with anybody that you're hiring, a contractor, people just have to be honorable and take pride in their work.
All right,
because they're, yeah.
so you're working on this bakery, you're working on this investment property, but I also know that you're trading.
Yeah, yeah, and in between all of that, I started that probably about 3 years ago, trading stock options. Came to a good understanding of certain trends associated with, I don't know, let's just say mutual funds that are rebalancing their positions and what that's going to do when you know that they have to pick up a certain amount of shares, how that'll maintain a share price.
I know that's been a big deal with like some of these what they're calling now retail stocks. You had AMC. I don't know if you got some of the names of the other ones that were like big deals in the news.
Well, that was a big deal in terms of Robinhood because ultimately you had small investors who were propping up stocks that really didn't have numbers beneath them that merited the growth in share price.
Right.
And usually people who can do that need hundreds of millions of dollars in order to do it. Because in the end, it's very simple. As soon as somebody wants to sell something, they want to sell it for $10. As long as there's somebody who will buy it for $10, you got to sell. But as soon as somebody says, no, I only want to spend $9, well, all of a sudden the person who wants to make that sale, it'll drop that price. But when you have enough money sitting there,
supply and demand on a very large and fast kind of scale, depending on what's going on. So, all right, so you're trading. We got the investment property. I know you got your hands in a lot of arenas. So, let's get into the backstory so we can come back because I know we're going to talk a little bit more about the businesses that you're involved in, what the future holds. Talk to us about growing up. I know you grew up in the Bronx. Where were you junior high, high school, right? Because you didn't start Randolph in freshman year. So talk to us about that transition. And how did finally Randolph end up on the scene, and tell us about your Randolph experience. So starting junior high, and we'll work our way up there.
No, absolutely. I actually was living with my mom in the suburbs in White Plains, and I went to White Plains Middle School. I remember that experience in 8th grade, and then as I was transitioning into 9th grade, my mother started this program called Camp Star, which was this amazing group of kids who came from 3 different high schools, Randolph, I'd love to say, might have been Lehman in the Bronx. It's wherever they had a Macy medical program. So I know there was one other high school in Brooklyn, his name will come to me, and she gathered this group of kids.
And explain just real quickly what a Macy medical program, because there's lots of different medical programs. We talk about like on the college level, you got CCNY right next to A. Philip Randolph that offers the Sophie Davis medical program, which if you're talking about getting into CCNY, community campus college, right, versus the Sophie, it's like 2 different worlds. What was the Macy?
Well, the underlying vision was if you want to have kids get into the medical field who are from backgrounds that are underrepresented, then you have to talk about what's the level of preparation that kids are getting so that they are not thrown into a chemistry class freshman year with 700 people where they're just a number and then don't do well.
Which happens to so many kids coming from NYC,
Absolutely.
wanting to go into a medical career, wanting to go into healthcare career, any kind of chemistry, biology. Now we're hitting that, and it's tear-inducing, depression-inducing, I want to quit college inducing kind of stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so the Macy Medical Program, there were courses that were specifically designed so that kids could work on cadavers, so that there would be different entryways to understand. You do need to know stuff and need to be an expert on things. But that expertise shouldn't come through some brutal experience like, as much as I enjoyed pledging my fraternity, but like everything isn't, an experience to tear you down.
Right.
But you need to have the flexibility to try something and fail consistently and learn from those failures, and then have all of those difficult moments translate into an aha moment. Yes. And essentially that's what Camp Star was. It was this program to essentially through curriculum teaching problem solving. So I can remember I was a gopher, a general organizer for expediting reports. You couldn't make this stuff up because my mother had negotiated so that she could hire both my sister and I to work at the camp, which is unheard of. People say, well, why would you allow her to do something like that? Well, it's because she was working 12 months a year and was saying, well, I have to do something with my kids, so I'm gonna bring them in as part of this camp. And it was an amazing experience for me because it was the first time that I had been surrounded by an amazing group of kids of color who were brilliant, who were hardworking, who were being challenged in ways to simply be better. And that had not been my academic experience to date. Going to school in the
because you were
suburbs.
in the White Plains,
Yeah,
and just for folks' reference, we're actually here live in Valhalla, New York, which is not too far from White Plains. I made some decisions on where to school my 4 children that I have with my wife based on school district White Plains, school district Valhalla. We have them in Valhalla, which is it just speaks to the levels, and we're going to get into Randolph, right? So you're in this summer because this is a summer program, the Camp Star, right?
Yep.
And then you get into high school. So which high school did you go to originally?
I started off at Archbishop Stepinac in White Plains.
Okay.
And I was there for a couple of years. And then by my second Camp Star experience, I was telling my mother, I was like, I want to go to Randolph. Like having been there, having worked there for 2 summers, by the time I wanted to go into my junior year.
So Camp Star was being held in the Randolph building?
No, it was at 2 different colleges, Marymount College, and I think we were at CW Post twice. So it was definitely on a college campus every summer, which was another fantastic experience, pulling everybody out of the city.
Yeah.
You're living there on campus. You have counselors, you have academic classes, you have a college tours, you have all of these experiences that are going on. It means 14.
That sounds
15.
amazing.
It was incredible. It was incredible. And it definitely reinforced from a problem solving standpoint that difficult subject matter is not there to tear you down. It's there to bring you to a new level of understanding, which you can't get to if you don't try. And one of the problems that I think Denzel Washington mentions incorrectly in his fantastic speech, where he says, he never saw a hearse pulling a U-Haul. He talks about connecting 9 dots, and he says with 5 straight lines. It's not 5 straight lines; it's 4 straight lines. And that was the first time I had seen that problem. And I'm watching people going back for, I'm not in any of the groups. Everybody's a little bit older than I am, but I'm just watching this effort. And there was no internet. There was no telephone to go look it up. You had to figure it out. And the problem boiled down to, as soon as you move that first line outside of those 9 dots, then you could connect them all. And it screamed in so many terms, like, we tend to put ourselves in positions where we limit our own perspectives, not because of what somebody has exposed us to,
right,
but because it's hard to see beyond a block, beyond a neighborhood, beyond a resume, and say,
I think that's what people are generally or wanting to refer to when they're saying think outside the box, is outside the limits of your imagination, because you just think these are my options. And so when you sort of let all that go and say anything is possible, right, that becomes a whole different thing, or at least more is possible, right? And so you were seeing that. So you were seeing this community of students, and you said, I want in on that. You weren't seeing that. I imagine Stepinac and White Plains was probably heavily white.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when I was at White Plains Middle School, the school itself was 50% African American. It was myself and one other young lady of color were the only 2 kids in any of the honors classes. And in my experience in public education in Westchester, because people rise to the expectations that you set for them. Yeah. So nobody's going to convince me that half of that school is filled with kids who were not bright. Half of that school was filled with kids who didn't have the same expectation along the way.
That just gave me chills. And I know we've had so many conversations, Charles Thompson and I, about where people expect people to be, and you got certain folks of different communities that look at a student and say, "Oh, that's good for them," and that how negative that can be across the board for lifting a community up. So you're like, all right, I'm liking what I see over here. So you transfer to Randolph. So how does that work? Because your mother's now principal of
Oh yeah, I didn't have a name for 2 years. I was just Mrs. Taylor's son. So, which was pure fun. Luckily, and a big shout out to Rose. Rose was a senior at the time. And let's just say this much. Rose was not the kind of person that you wanted to grab and put a hold on. Rose was a girl who could handle herself. And she just made it very clear in my junior year that nobody was going to get a hold of me. And I thank God for that. So a big shout out to you, Rose, wherever you are, because good or bad, right or wrong, there are always people, and which makes sense. There are people who don't understand how they're being helped. They just understand that they're being forced to do something that's uncomfortable. And if there's anything that my mother was magical at, was putting people in positions where they were not going to be comfortable, but they were going to grow. And so that there were some misguided folks, but it was more mischievous than anything else, who might have wanted to mess around with me in my junior year, but nothing ever came of it. And by the time I was a senior, nobody messes with seniors.
All right. And so just to get a little bit more information, kind of roundabout thing, do you have siblings? What was the relationship with your mother, Lottie Taylor, who's the principal of the school? Because for me, I'd almost be thinking, even though you got these kind of cultural wants and everything, being in Stepanak, sort of seeing some of the other stuff, I almost think, do you want to go someplace where your mom's the principal? Like, what was going on? Give me some of the full picture here.
Well, I was also, I think at the time, getting a better understanding of like how the world worked. So wanting to go where my mother was the principal was really wanting to go where Black and brown was valued and Black and brown was treasured. And that was not Stepanak. That was not White Plains in general. That was not my experience. And I wanted to go someplace where I was going to be pushed. The pushing that I saw at Stepanak was somebody not doing their homework and being smacked by one of the brothers. That to me was not, I was like, okay, I guess that'll work for some people, but that wasn't motivating for me.
Yeah.
And there was also the math.
But even though you were still in the honors classes.
Well, but to me, even at Stepanak, the idea of being in the honors classes, but dealing with people who, they would say things like, let's talk about the divinity of Jesus. And I would say things like, oh, so we're going to talk about the Council at Lyceum, where they took the books from the Egyptian mystery system and then took the Jesus story and adapted it a little bit and then made up a bunch of things so they could control people. Yeah, the brothers didn't like that all that much. So there wasn't, from my standpoint, a lot of truth in their dogma. And that was something I had been very conscious of, having gone to. And
people tend to take it very personally.
Absolutely.
When you start challenging what they take as dogma, as their foundational beliefs. And I've seen that time after time as somebody that respects and appreciates organized religion, but has some beefs around the patriarchal, just the sense that these things are in any way divine, when you know that it's human hands. And I know it's supposed to be God's hands working on all that stuff, but that's sort of like somebody saying that the educational system was handed down by God. I'm sure that, the administrators would love to say that, but at the end of the day, there's so many things that need to be fixed. There's so many things that are right. I looked at billboards that have the way that, social workers are supposed to work in the system. And you look at the scripture on the wall.
Sure.
Man, it looks good.
And like anything, if you take pieces of the Bible, you can justify anything.
Yeah.
But to me, it was more of saying, where can I go where I can grow? Yeah. And I can't even say that I knew it at that time, but I also knew that there was active hostility to somebody who was not of the majority culture making statements about anything, and then kind of carrying that forward, because that wasn't the goal or objective. And I don't dismiss anybody else's experience. Somebody could have gone a step and I had a great experience.
So obviously you weren't talking much about religion, going from a religious Catholic, right, Stepanak, and then going to public school. So that issue wasn't there. What was life like academically in Randolph for you at that time?
I was in classes, I remember physics, chemistry with Mr. Maffei, like with these great teachers, but with these
feel free to mention those names. Drop those names. It's
Yeah.
always good with the teachers and folks that you were dealing with.
I mean, the reality, I can remember Mr. Rafson, who was the math department chair, who was absolutely brilliant as a math teacher. I had Vincent Tromatozzi. I think he's passed away. He was the chair of the language department, because I was one of the few students there. I was the only student there who took Italian, because I've done 2 years of Italian, and to finish that off, I had Mr. Maffei.
Italian being big in White Plains with all the was it Knights of Columbus and all that stuff.
Yeah. But it was Miss Sales. I remember for calculus. Just a wonderful group of people. But to me, you don't really go to school for teachers. You go to school to socialize. And it was amazing to me to have all of these kids from all over the city.
Yeah,
absolutely brilliant, working hard. It was just a fantastic experience.
So I got to ask this, because I feel like you're part of the founding squad. How many years had Randolph been around at that point?
Probably 7 years.
7 years.
Yeah.
And what year did you graduate?
89.
89. So around 82, 83?
82, yeah.
82, okay. Yeah. 82, Randolph was founded. So, your early years, I know Lottie Taylor is an institution within an institution in terms of what she brought to the table. A lot of people talk about that. What did you notice academically then? And I know you've been in the building in recent years, in and out, and obviously I know you don't know every detail, as I don't. But what were the major differences that you noticed from your time at Randolph, and then in these later years, these recent iterations of Randolph?
Well, I think the politics of the small school movement, the attempts to tear Randolph down, but then Randolph kept going because the data proved that it was a comprehensive high school that did not merit the Bloomberg plan to make a bunch of different small schools because you can close them quickly and open them, which was, I don't blame anybody for that. I mean, that made sense for failing schools, but Randolph is not a failing school. Yeah. I'm not sure how strong the ties are to City College, because you can't serve two masters. And if they're the ability to be able to take as many courses at the City University, I know I didn't take advantage of that as much as I could. I did what was required.
But at the time you were going, that partnership seemed a lot stronger, because I know that was kind of what because at one time everybody referred to Randolph as campus. That was because of that partnership there. So that was a lot stronger in your days. Yeah.
I can't speak to what's happening now. I can only say, in my mind,
I know David Fanning is certainly working on that, but I can speak to the years that I was there. Sometimes it felt almost non-existent in terms of a partnership, other than the fact that graduation was held, within, a hall at City College. There didn't seem a lot. I think there's like the odd course here, but it sounded like to me, from everything that I've heard, that especially like honors courses and being able to take college classes as a part of the curriculum was much more free-willing. I think Mr. David Fanning, the current principal, I know that, now we're talking about pandemic and stuff like that, but I know in the time leading up, he was expanding that access because at like I said, at some time it just felt like that wasn't there in terms of serving two masters. There was none, right? It was all Randolph, and if you were taking an honors, in which some of those classes, some of the ability offerings of even honors classes just wasn't there. As I had heard, it was available in the past. It was much more focused on being a very rigorous Stuyvesant of Harlem kind of school, and it ended up being a place where, because it wasn't a place where that you were having to take a specialized test to get into the building, the level of things kind of degraded to a large degree, and that level of academic rigor that Black and Brown Stuyvesant of Harlem, that feeling sort of echoed away right around the same time we're going through so many things where they were challenging, does this school need to exist? And for me, coming from a small, newish college, I went to School of the Future down 23rd Street, was kind of pulled together, we didn't have any of the sports teams,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the academic resources, art room, serious kind of side pieces to the education, which make all the difference for some students being able to actually flex their artistic abilities, weight room, physical stuff. None of that existed for me as a high school student growing up in New York City.
Well, it's so clear to me now that all of the things that my mother was working towards and putting in place, additional money that she raised, researching curriculum, partnering with Xavier University, which actually provided a good bit of coursework and structure for the summer program for Camp Star, that required an incredible amount of energy and effort from her and for everyone around her. And the idea that that could carry itself forward when most people would say, well, I don't understand. You're in high school. Why don't you take an AP exam? Or what about international baccalaureate? All of these things that to me are 100% inferior to taking a college course. If you're qualified to take a college course, I should have left Randolph with 6 or 7 classes from the City University and a transcript from the City University. That to me is obvious now. I can't say that that would be obvious to a student who's currently there. I can't say that it would have been obvious to other people that I went to high school with, because people left and they were well prepared to go to university and to do well and to finish.
Well, I love having these conversations because so much of my life, not doing well in high school, not graduating. I mean, I did all 4 years, but I didn't graduate. And so I think we all would love to go back, and especially if we didn't push ourselves the way that we would have liked to and open up opportunities that we would have liked to open up. Man, I could have taken advantage of this. I could have taken advantage of that. And so that's the value of a program like SBI. We're like, hey, this opportunity, are you in this program? Are you doing this? Are you checking this out? And I love that, to expose that to somebody that's currently in Randolph. Hey, are you taking advantage of college courses offered? Are you making sure that you are taking advantage of, even I was interviewing Kosua, who was taking advantage of programs not only at SBI within Randolph, but she was going down to 125th and doing stuff with Harlem Children's Zone programs they were offering. I was like, man, that's amazing, right? Unless you tell somebody, they just don't even know that some of these programs. And so she's a writer. She's published several books now, and a lot of that off the strength of this writing program that she was able to take part of that wasn't even in the Randolph building, right? So all these different pieces, add up to enormous, incredible opportunity. So talk to us. You have this senior year in Randolph. What was that like in terms of preparing for the next move? How did you figure out where you were going? What were you going to do?
Well, in applying, I really loved being in the city. So I was like, well, what are the schools that I could go to so I could stay in the city? I mean, I just discovered the city because I moved in with my dad and who lived in the Bronx, and would take the train into Randolph on a regular basis. But the idea of where could I apply in an urban setting? So I was attracted to NYU. I was attracted to Columbia. I did apply to Brown, but Columbia ended up being the place to go because literally it was the other building, set of buildings on the other hill. Yeah, going back and forth.
116th
and Broadway. And look, in it's not even so much in retrospect, but for anybody going to college, it's recognizing that any institution wants to perpetuate itself. And the question becomes, will it perpetuate itself by helping you, or will it perpetuate itself at your expense? And a lot of that boils down to embracing truth, because everyone is going to tell you things that are true from their perspective. And it's so important to take that in, because when I'm sitting here with kids who went to private schools where they lived with their teachers and they were used to generating conversations around books like the Iliad that they had all spent the weekend reading, and I'm being given the Iliad on a Friday and told we're going to be discussing it on Monday. And the first 50 pages first? No, the book. We're going to be discussing the book on Monday. Well, what are we going to be discussing on Wednesday? On Wednesday, we're going to be discussing the Odyssey. Well, wait a second. Monday to Wednesday, I'm supposed to read an 800-page book. And that was for one class. But you begin to realize very quickly that there's such a difference when you've read those books already. There's such a difference when you took an AP course in chemistry and then took chemistry again as a freshman. Because if you're serious about medicine, it wasn't about whatever grade you got on the AP. It was about saying, when I'm actually prescribing medications for someone and I'm sitting here worried about interactivity of drugs, I'm really going to need to know not only the math, but the underlying chemistry behind that. And all that matters for medical school is how well I did in these foundational courses. Nobody cares that I took AP chemistry already and I'm taking chemistry again. And what I learned at Columbia is that there were a whole lot of people who, as a martial artist, a whole lot of people who appeared to be really competent, and they actually were competent. But it wasn't because they were inherently brilliant. It was in many cases because they could spend $150 an hour for a tutor, or they were taking a class for a second time, or they decided to audit a class and then take it again for a grade. All of this was to construct someone who could then go on to law school, to medical school, and have this amazing looking academic transcript, and have that balanced with the fact that there are all these things that you get to explore in college where you're not saddled with the child and not saddled with the mortgage, and you can kind of keep your mind together. Because I'll say this is not a terrible thing about Columbia. It is what it is. There were 35 black males admitted my year out of 800. There were 35 that graduated. It wasn't the same 35 that started. But Columbia will boast 100% graduation rate for its black males. It's all a matter of details. And I tend to obsess over the details. I wish I had obsessed over them then, because I probably would have made some different choices. But, you picked up on something about the young lady who took the program outside of Randolph. The whole point of it is saying there's so much that we don't know when we're younger. But I think that for kids, inherently, people know when they're dealing with someone who is trying to be helpful to them. That's something I think kids inherently understand. And when they feel like a little funny about somebody, that they probably should trust that gut. But now that you've got that gut going, now it's also sitting here and saying, is the person giving me advice that's like telling me how to win the lottery? Or are they really telling me if I take these steps, I can expect this particular outcome?
Yeah, I love that, because there's a lot of folks out there advertising the lottery, and people will get sucked up by that. Yeah.
I think LeBron James has this fantastic quote. He says, "I'm tired of people telling me that they want to switch paychecks with me. They're not willing to do what I'm willing to do in order to get this paycheck." And what I do, spending $1 million a year literally on a trainer so that he can stay in shape for that very long season. I have a cousin who's he's a retired professional basketball player, Grant Hill. Right. And I love the stories that Grant would share, because he talks about playing against Michael Jordan in the All-Star game. So
I probably watched that. Yeah. That's my years. Yeah.
So there's details. So he says he rushes up on Jordan. He's going to deny Jordan the inbound. So Jordan stops the game and says to the ref, "I got to talk to the young boy here for a second." He says, "Son, I'm going to get the ball. And when I get it, I'm going to do with it what I want." Now, in the end, he didn't curse at him. He didn't talk to him, go back and forth. But that kind of trash talking is backed up by all those hours in the gym. And that's what people don't see. People see the outcomes, but they don't see what it took to get there.
Yeah.
And ultimately, high school, being at Randolph, going off to college, all that should be about figuring out what you're passionate about.
And I wanted to get into that too, because we mentioned like where you were, White Plains, going city, you're going to a school that Lottie Taylor, your mother, is the principal of the school. What else did you have going on in your life? I know you mentioned to me you're a DJ. Were you DJing at the time? What was going on personally? Like, what were you getting into? What was sort of on your radar that you were passionate about?
Definitely music was huge. I had a cousin also graduated from Randolph, Ken Jarvis, and I started off, of course, with the Technique 1200 turntables and carrying crates of records.
Yeah,
and,
I know that well.
I think we did like maybe one party like at Randolph, which I'll never forget, because I was trying to do backspins and the needle started skipping, and my cousin and a few other people picked up stuff off the floor and threw it at me, like, just play music, go back and forth. It's like, all right, yeah, whatever. It's all good, But then that was my big outlet throughout college. So as other people were on 114th Street and Broadway moving in with their clothes, I'm moving in with 2 big bass bottoms, 2 EV speakers, and I go back. And, got a real interesting view of what life would be like as a mobile DJ. I DJ'd a few concerts, like a Run DMC concert, a Public Enemy concert.
That's awesome.
Just these amazing experiences. But music was kind of my big outlet, as a piece. And then I got involved in different tutoring programs. A big one was at St. John's the Divine, the Manhattan Valley youth program. And John Bess, who was a major parent and influencer at A. Philip Randolph, his son Khalil was in my graduating class, and John may rest in peace. One of the big supporters of that program happened to be Bill Cosby, who donated a lot of money, and we were able to set up different tutoring centers at different high schools in Manhattan. And that's what kind of gave me the education bug, where I kept looking at all of these kids coming in specifically with questions in math and saying, why is somebody showing this to you this way? Like that's a way of doing it, but it's not the only way of doing it. And the fact that you have questions means that it's not your way of doing it. So all you're really telling me is this is what somebody told you, but you don't really know what you're doing it or why you're doing it. For you. No, not at all. So that kind of prompted me when I graduated to go back to complete an undergraduate math major while I was working as a substitute teacher, because I had enough math credits to teach.
So how did you decide? Because I think you were on a medical track. Did I get that right? Or
not necessarily. I would take as a junior. I took some of the engineering classes because there was the engineering program. There was a medical.
Did you have a desire, like when you set out? You're finishing up your education at Randolph. You're saying, I want to stay in the city. I'm going to Columbia. Did you have an original intent, like, this is what I want to do with my Columbia education?
I mean, I didn't have enough exposure to careers and really didn't use my summers well enough to be able to see what I did like. I definitely found out what I didn't like because I was majoring in economics. So I ended up getting a summer internship at an economic office that did some sets of projections for the city. I'll never forget, they had me entering data from the census. And that data would drive how resources were going to be distributed in a particular neighborhood. And I made a mistake entering the data. And I'll never forget the guy pulling me in. He was like, well, it's possible that there were really only 2 results here. But if there were really only 2 results here, and then he showed me like that was a building, and there's no way that there were only 2 possible. And I skipped the line in doing the entry, but I had no idea what I was doing the entry around. But
that's not for me.
Yeah, I said, as much as it was an interesting experience, it definitely did not thrill me or excite
the
me.
Data entry piece to so many careers. I'm always fascinated when I find anybody that digs the back end paperwork aspects of a job. It's always fascinating to me because I think I share that with you. Meanwhile, some of the best work that I did for SBI in terms of like tracking, results, getting students involved in our SAT program, the spreadsheet was the thing.
Absolutely.
But I was able to connect to that because it was more around my passion. I still didn't love doing the spreadsheet stuff, but it wasn't like you're sitting there just crunching hours of data. It was a lot of entering, but every entry was like, I'm reaching out. Hey, Michael, what's going on? What's going on with Mom? Like, why was this late? Right. So that was my entry point. Whole different kind of thing than somebody that's just compiling data, even though I was in certain respects in terms of like getting students' grades and that sort of thing and inserting into the spreadsheet, which, trying to make it match up with names, all that. Really compelling, fun stuff.
Well, the reality is that had the person introduced the task to me with that mistake, it would have completely changed my overall focus because I was like, oh wow, there's really something to this, as opposed to, are you just finding something for me to do because I'm still an undergraduate.
Yeah, people want to feel significant and feel like they have purpose to what they're doing. Absolutely.
And it's funny because I've never lost an interest in underlying economic theory. And there are so many things, let's just say solutions to everyday problems, that when they are data driven, it seems obvious, but it's not obvious until you get into the background behind that data. I think there's a town in Texas. Let's just say I'm thinking about any town in Texas, but there's one town in Texas specifically that has addressed its homeless problem. Very very simple solution. They gave people a house. The first thing they did was establish a place for people to live. It wasn't necessarily a home, but it was a place for them to go. Other places says no, you got to get them off drugs, you got to get them off alcohol. And people realize you can. All that is true. Unless the person has a stable place to go every day, it doesn't make any difference whatever else you do.
I'm not going to go down the road. I'm just going to say I agree because I know we're going to go way off the interview script here, because I think that's incredibly so many different social problems where people are creating more problems than they're necessarily solving. Right?
Absolutely.
You ended up picking the education route. Obviously, I don't know what your father did.
My dad, he was a teacher at the Bronx High School of Science, a biology teacher.
All right, so he's a teacher. Your mother's an educator, administrator. You chose the education route. Why is that something that ended up being career track for you? And then tell us a little bit about how that kind of worked out. You went back to school to continue your education. Talk to us about why you chose that and how that career trajectory has worked out for you.
Well, I think the first school that I worked in, the school that's still functioning now, Manhattan Comprehensive Night and Day High School, and they were a school that pulled in kids from every school in the city that were older, 17 to 21, a dropout retrieval program, and they also had a large population of kids who were coming from other countries. Mm-hmm. So literally, Spofford was a stop off of the bus. When kids were coming out of Spofford, they would say to kids, "Are you interested in getting back into high school?" They would drop them at our school. The one thing I loved about the school is, and here's where
Spofford
was a notorious youth facility, sort of like the Rikers Island for kids. Really, it was not a place that you wanted to end up.
I'm trying to remember back, a kid of the 80s and 90s, in 90s high school. I think Spofford was like,
that was not, you did not want to end up in Spofford. It was a correctional facility. It was a youth correctional facility. Now, the beautiful part about this is, if for people who like numbers, we would process 3,000 kids a year to maintain a population of 800, because the kids who were older easily could be overtaken by any of the circumstances they were dealing with. I'm not going to sell drugs anymore. I'm going to get myself going back to school. Well, you start selling drugs again, you get picked up, you're out of school. It's being a parent, very, well, I can't make it in today because I don't have anybody to watch my child, but we were a night school. So there was a day program and there was an evening program. But the one thing that I thought was so powerful about the experience there was saying to someone, "Hey, you're processing 3,000 kids. That's a lot of kids. I mean, it's 2,200 kids that you're just losing." I'm like, "Yeah, but of those 800, we have a graduating class of 50 to 100 kids every single year." And you've got to ask yourself, from a societal standpoint, now you've got anywhere from the classes range, like I said, from 60 to 100 that would graduate every single year. And saying now that kid is either going into the military, they're going on to college, or in a job training program. If that kid hadn't done that, what would they be doing? And then you begin to realize very quickly, well, wait a second. You mean for every single kid that you are helping, that's literally saving hundreds of thousands of dollars in the costs of criminal justice. That's the whole point. And but why are you waiting so long on a I was like, I'm not waiting long. That's the school that I happen to be at. I didn't make anybody else along the way not try and do the things that we were doing. But there's also another component to this. You can offer a solution to somebody. They've got to be ready for it. And in many instances, it was the kids who simply made the choice on a daily basis to trust that we were going to make a difference, and they were ready for it.
It's such a big deal. And I've noticed this definitely as part of the SBI program. We get into a funny place, as a program within a school, but even in, on the school level, how much credit, somebody can take in somebody's education and their good trajectory. I feel like, if you take credit for the good, you got to take credit for the bad too. But it's one of those things where you feel like, and I want to kind of get into the kind of the personal thinking in your story and why you actually went down this educational path. What, how personally were you taking education? Why was this something that was passionate for you? I hear the passion when you're talking about changing people's lives, getting them into a place where they can actually go, not only for themselves, but for society. But what was pushing you towards this thing? Because, there's all of these different outside influences. We're talking about, hey, if somebody's ready, they're ready, right? They're going to do it maybe with you, maybe without you. They're ready. They're going to go on education. What was pushing you forward to say, hey, I'm somebody that can actually help people and help them educate themselves and move to that next step?
It was actually a specific incident with a student that comes to mind where I was asking kids to read a problem out loud. And I remember because this young man still works at a movie theater on 14th Street, if at least he did as of 6 years ago. And I remember saying, Pablo, can you read this for me? And Pablo said, F you, called me the N-word, grabbed the desk and threw it at me. And the security grabbed him and he eventually left the school. What I realized and what he taught me within the moment was most kids who get past 8th grade into 9th grade survive that will end up graduating, because most kids who drop out between 5th and 8th grade because they made the transition from learning to read to reading to learn. Well, Pablo was functionally illiterate, as is 90% of the prison population in Rikers. So what he taught me was I needed, as a math teacher, to have an understanding of where kids' literacy levels were before I ask anybody to do something that is the core reason as to why they are 17, 18, 19 years old and still in high school. And then there are solutions there. There are ways that kids can be helped. So my motivation was realizing that I made mistakes. And because of some of the poor choices that I had made, because nobody told me, nobody had trained me in that. That wasn't the core of it. It was, you're going to have attrition. I understand I'm going to have attrition, but if I can do something about that attrition, then I should.
Yeah.
And so my passion on a daily basis was saying, there's somebody who's ready, and that's who I want to get to. And if there's something that I can do to help get that person ready, then I want to figure out how to go ahead and do that.
So you asked him, can you read this? And of course he was like, I'm not going to let you embarrass me. I'm not going to let you make me feel inferior in this moment. And there was a reaction. What if you could go back and do that again? And certainly that was the inspiration, right? So how would you tell somebody, that's putting a student or somebody in a situation where they're going to do something that may be stressful for them? What's your approach now?
There's absolute legitimacy in saying somebody has to be in this zone of proximal development, this place of discomfort in order to stretch. There's a huge difference in between a kid who is functionally illiterate, who you have not established what their literacy level is, and then challenging them within the moment to do something that they don't have the ability to do, than saying to someone, based upon our personal relationship, based upon the testing that I've done, based upon the work that I've done, I know what I can push you to do. That requires time. And for many educators, they don't put that time in.
So it's not even like you can't even, you're saying there is no solution to that particular situation because you need to know beforehand.
Absolutely.
Whether or not this person can handle that request, period.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And there's pre-testing
as an educator. Yeah. Pre-qualifying the situation, because now you're in a classroom and you're asking people to put themselves out there. We know the fear of public speaking. We know people don't want to be embarrassed. I think I'm reading How to Win Friends and Influence People for the second time around, and people want to feel important. They want to feel significant, and so if you take that away,
absolutely,
and even without doing it on purpose. You're going to face some really negative consequences.
And, the beauty of experiences in education, both inside of the city and outside of the city, there's a young man whose name I won't mention, who's was adopted by a family and ended up out in Chappaqua. And uh, this particular student, his mom happened to be a prostitute. She used to lock him in the closet while she serviced Johns, go back and forth. And there was a level of violence that he exhibited at home that we never saw in school. Never. It was so we had a specialized program that had not been designed for him, but designed in general, where there was a psychologist, a special education teacher in a room all day long, and different subject area teachers would come in and they would work with kids. He was in that program for a year and a half before he could actually enter into a classroom. The level of support, psychological support, relationship building that had happened with him was amazing. He's a carpenter today. And what it said to me was there's no experience that that anyone has gone through that can't be addressed, but you've got to begin by taking into account the person and where they are.
I love this kind of train of thought, and I want to kind of get into, the educational journey, and because you moved from being an educator to an administrator, so I want to capture that. But I feel like I got to mention, that kind of educational piece, and what we do with SBI in terms of preparing students for college and career, but the therapy side, which is what you're talking about, the mental health side of it is so important, because trauma, especially for economically, disadvantaged youth, is really something that is detrimental to a child's education and limits the possibilities. We could talk about, the racial disparities, sexual, right, gender, who's starting where on the starting block, who has the lead in terms of being able to get into society, and who has more set against them. But put all that aside, but you got all these shootings that are happening in schools, and you're saying, what's the missing component? Nobody's taking care of these children's minds.
Well, the key is who knows the kid well.
Right.
And it's always interesting to me, because I would say to anyone as an educator, as an intervention specialist, and somebody says, well, I don't have time. And I always looked at it like, well, I'm either going to take the time now, or when I'm at the cash machine, the kid will be behind me with a pipe. It's a little late then, but I do train in martial arts. I think that I'll be able to defend myself, but I still think it's a little bit too late then. And I don't think it's unreasonable for any school of any size to be able to say there's got to be at least one person that kid can come into school and say, I'm in a crisis. Who can I go talk with? And good or bad, right or wrong, I don't care if the crisis is I'm hungry, I didn't have breakfast today. Until you take care of that hunger, you're not teaching that kid anything.
Yeah, it just seems like that. And I got family that are in schools in Texas. Grew up in the New York City system. My kids are here in Valhalla. I've experienced schools out in California. It just seems like wherever you go, the focus of education, the priorities of education is not towards this holistic vision of servicing every aspect of a child's mind. It's about preparing a student to pass these tests and get them from, if it's high school, 9th grade, 12th grade, maybe into some sort of college or vocational school.
I would actually argue the schools are doing exactly what they've been designed to do. They were never designed to have everybody be prepared for college, to have an opportunity. They were designed for the 19th and 20th century reality. And as much as we're in the 21st century, that doesn't mean that the schools, we're still giving the kids summers off for farm chores. Like that's why the summers are there. And there's a whole industry around that. There's camps. There's people, well, I need a break. Well, if the experience for the 10 months that kids were in school was something that the kid was looking forward to, they wouldn't need a summer off. Yeah. There's a whole redesign that needs to be examined and put in place. And there's some places that are
and we've just built traditions around it now. Now Absolutely. It's institutionalized, now like summer vacations, right? There's the whole thing. But not every school also works that way. So when we go back to thinking outside the box, we can think about, there's private schools that are 12 months of the year. There
were private schools that were open every day during this pandemic, and you didn't hear about massive breakouts of COVID. In the end, schools are childcare. That's really what they are. They allow the adults to go to work. And to me, the fact that most adults will believe that their local public school is great is much more heavily influenced by, I'm not getting calls about my kid. My kid doesn't seem unhappy. Then is the school really pushing my kid to figure out what they're passionate about and function at their potential? And there are plenty of places and there are plenty of individual experiences that are going to be positive. It's not saying that, but it's not designed for that. And that's the piece that I think doesn't get enough attention.
We as a society, we like to take the friction out of things, right? Things work when there's no friction. And so what you're speaking to is like, hey, if I can get through my day and I didn't have to worry about it, it's all good.
And look, we're Americans. If we can get away with not doing something, we damn sure will go ahead and do it.
All right. So kind of fill in the blanks here, because you have this view on education the way you have it now. You did your college education, you did your postgraduate education. When were some of these, sort of pieces sort of clicking for you in terms of what you thought education should be? And then why were you making some of the choices? Because you not only went from being an educator to being an administrator. So when did you start making some of those decisions, and what was sort of the emphasis behind it? Because you have a certain view on what education should be. So where were you trying to take that?
Well, the only thing that pushed me into administration was saying, I think I understand how a good teacher needs to be supported. And then over time, my view of what a good teacher was and what that support needs to be just kept getting more informed and more informed and more informed, because you begin to realize that telling somebody something is probably the least effective way of getting them to change their practice.
I agree. Yeah.
But creating an experience for someone,
Yeah.
Even as an adult, can be exceptionally powerful.
Right.
And so there are not too many things that I found that are really helpful in this regard, that have had the staying power. One of them is a book called Mindsets by a woman named Dr. Carol Dweck, who examined the difference in between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. And I loved having conversations with teachers where I would say to them, hey, look, you want an example from business or from sports or from relationships, to get an understanding of what this growth mindset is. And I love that people pick relationships. So Carol Dweck's having a conversation with her husband. She says to her husband, it's a heavy conversation. They're talking about how they can grow as a couple. And her husband says, I need some space, and she's really upset. So Carol gets up, she goes to the kitchen, she's walking back and forth. She's, no, I'm going to make this relationship work. She comes back and says, I love you. We're going to make this happen. And he says to her, I just need some space on the couch. I just wanted you to move over a little bit. That's all it was. And her whole point was, if you have a growth mindset, you don't view those incredibly difficult words that you've just heard as the end of a conversation, but a challenge to be overcome. So it's as simple as a teacher saying to a student, you can't factor. Well, that doesn't sound very nice. You can't factor yet. We have some work to do. Just add that yet in there. There are these subtle things that we can do as parents, as coaches, as teachers, as mentors, that will make all the difference in the world. Because
I love that.
And to me, those there haven't been. I've only found like 2 or 3 resources like that, but they have been universal, and there is no downside associated with them.
Communication is so big, though. So and it's it seems like, and you're somebody that, so just kind of going through the resume here, but you were a teacher at Manhattan Comprehensive Night and Days High School, teacher at the Freeport High School, instructor Science Technology Enrichment Program at New York University, and then you moved on to the assistant principal of organization at Manhattan Comprehensive Night and Day, and then from there went to assistant principal of organization at the Bard High School in Brooklyn, principal of Richard Stockton School. Communication in somebody's career, right? I think it's one of those things that we're always learning. I don't know that anybody, you got folks that are really great in the personal growth space. Tony Robbins is a great communicator. I think he would probably be first on the list to tell you that he is always learning how to communicate better. It's one of those things that we're always getting better at. Teachers have an incredible responsibility to communicate at a high level because they are responsible for another person's education and development. But we're all works in process. So how did that kind of play into, one, your own pedagogy and how you were going out and educating folks, but also leading other people?
Well, I think in working with anyone, you have to meet people where they are. So as much as there might be 4 or 5 things that I believe should be a part of any excellent lesson. If somebody's in the middle of a divorce, if somebody has just had a new child, so the baby didn't sleep last night and they come in and none of those things are present, before I get into here are all the things I think you need to do differently, I need to have a personal relationship with that person, because as soon as somebody feels safe, this is true with adults, as soon as they feel safe, we can go somewhere, because every lesson is not going to be fantastic. There are going to be days that just aren't good days. But what I learned over time is by building a good personal relationship with someone, and it doesn't mean being intimate friends with someone, but by saying to them, today things really weren't reflective of what I've seen before and who I know you are. As soon as somebody wants to please you, be it a student, be it somebody that you're supervising, be it a peer, as soon as they want to earn your respect, that's where the magic happens. So in some ways, if somebody believes, well, no, just tell them the answer. Well, that doesn't mean anything, because I want the person to come to that conclusion on their own.
It's really interesting how often that's the case, that what we think we want is not what we really want. As a student, as an adult within a job, just give me the answer. Are you going to remember that later? Is it going to make an impact? So how do you make that substantial so that you actually remember it, you feel it? It's interesting what we hold on to and what we just kind of forget. And so that communication piece comes in so big. Again, what you're talking about, how do you actually make it memorable, make it something where they have an experience versus we're just moving you along.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's there's a great speech, Stanley Tucci's, in one of the movies that talked about the 2008 financial crisis. And he talks about how he was an engineer and how he built this bridge, and the bridge saved people all of these hours in their lifetime because now they could move from point A to B quickly. And his opposite guy says to him, that may all be true, but some people, they sometimes just want to take the long way home, And so, and for me as a mathematician, I of course always want the most efficient, the shortest solution than going back and forth. But I've realized that over time, there are many different pathways to get somewhere. And as long as our goals are the same, we can have conversations about different ways of getting there. And kids are no different. A kid may have a very valid reason as to why they've chosen to do something in a particular way. And when I'm sitting here saying, yeah, but when you're taking the SAT, you only got a minute, blah, blah, blah. And then the kid says, well, I have an anxiety disorder. You have an anxiety disorder? Let's get you 504 plan, because now you got double time. So now you can go ahead and use that. And people say to me, well, like, why would you say something like that? I mean, I said, because I understand the system. I understand what the wealthy kid is doing. And how they're taking the SAT and what they have to report to the college. I understand the rules. And to me, the one thing about rules, they tend to be flexible for the people who understand them and for the people who wrote them. We don't tend to write those rules, So it's very important that we also understand them.
I love that. And so has that been your kind of driving impetus around being an administrator and continuing down that road?
Absolutely, because if for nothing else, recognizing that the kids given specific advantages, given head starts. Head start could be, hey, my dad has a PhD in X, Y, and Z. So when I go home and I ask my dad or my mom, could be my mom with the advanced degree, there's a different kind of conversation that's happening. There's a different level of understanding that you can be pushed to depending on what your parents, your brother, your experience, the people that you're surrounded by, what they know. Depending on how much money you have, depending on how much stability you have. When you go home and you don't have a little brother or little sister that you have to care for, you don't have to work. All of these freedoms that somebody may have are actually tactical advantages, and they can be overcome by the school. But it can't be overcome by the school that says we're going to be open from 7 a.m. for you to sit in here and get some breakfast, which is not necessarily a bad thing, and then your class will begin. But when the school is saying there's going to be somebody here who knows you really well, we're going to have an overall program, we're going to take you, the brighter kid, that this comes easy to you, we're going to train you as a tutor, because last time you got on the train, when was the last time you got to choose who got on the train with you? Let's make sure everybody knows the math here, because you never know who's going to be driving the train or the plane. And you can't have too many, what does Chris Rock say? Can't have any bad pilots, who land some planes and crash others, to go back and forth. And as soon as it becomes that kind of conversation, the collective identity takes over, and then there's so much that can get accomplished.
It's really interesting. We live in a world where so much of the political conversation is around,
rugged individualism.
Well, I wasn't going to say rugged individual. I was going to say, more along the lines of rugged individualism, but the sense that I'm not, it's that zero-sum game stuff,
Absolutely.
right? Where it's like, yeah, that's great to help somebody, Christian charity, all that good stuff, but me first, right? And let them pull themselves up by the bootstraps. Meanwhile, you have so much that is supported by folks that are dealing with challenges. And, whether it's your immigrant community, whether it's your impoverished communities, whether it's women dealing with more challenges and expected to do more with less. And God forbid somebody have a step up or a program that actually helps them. When you were talking about, folks having to take care of siblings and different things at home, I'm thinking to myself, that's something that, for my own daughter, she helps us out. I'm like, I want to reward her.
Mm-hmm.
I want to help her. And a student can come to school feeling punished for for giving back to their community, for attending church on Sunday, for having to take care of siblings, so they have to go home and can't participate in the after school program. You feel punished for doing more for other people. And I don't know that that's the message that we as a society necessarily want to send to a young person.
Well, I think the message that we want to send as a society, especially in the United States, is that everything is the way that it is, and that's good. And it's me sitting here saying, no, it isn't. No, it isn't. It's the only way that you can have that perspective is if you begin to cut off life as if there was no past, as if there was no set of circumstances that allowed somebody to accumulate wealth.
The now without context.
Absolutely. And so in the end, I think my pastor, the now senator from the great state of Georgia, Dr. Raphael G. Warnock, he said, for so many people who are used to being in and functioning in society from a position of privilege, equality feels like oppression. And there's so much of that where people, I don't understand why I have to give up. Nobody's asking you to give up anything. The last time I checked, I don't have millions of dollars in the bank. The Army, Navy, and Air Force and Marines are not keeping people from attacking the United States so they can get to my wealth. But what the United States, the greatness of the United States, that she wrote down all these fantastic things that she has yet to live up to. But we're trying. And to me, that those are the messages that for kids in school, that's what you aspire towards, not because of all the perfect things that have happened, but in the end, every challenge that you've been presented with has been an opportunity for you to get better. And when you're appropriately supported, when it's not one mistake and done, which is another thing that depending on where you live, make the mistake of going to vote at the wrong precinct someplace in Texas with their new law, see what happens.
Yeah.
And that was just a mistake. But I wasn't trying to. But I understand. But you don't really, we made a law so that we could punish you for doing that. And you said, but why? Why did you need to punish me for doing that? Why couldn't you help me make a good choice to begin with? Well, you should know. Why should I know?
And there's so much, right? You got everything from voting rights to narcotics, things that are probably a health problem that are treated like a criminal problem. So much of that. Talk to me, because I know if we get deeper into the education, you're at Horace Greeley High School, Chappaqua, New York, for several years. Long run there, but that ended with a little bit of controversy. You want to talk about that at all? Are you allowed to?
Well, just to say that, like in any place else that you work, you begin to realize that if you're not in sync with whatever direction your school board or principal, or if you're not moving in the same direction, it's time to separate. And from my standpoint,
and you were there for 13 years.
13 years, yeah. But all I can say is when it comes there's so many wonderful students, so many wonderful faculty members, so many wonderful parents that I dealt with over the years. It was overall was a wonderful experience, and it was just an experience where I never meant to stay there that long. And now it's in the history books.
Now, let me ask you a question, because I think we're talking to alumni of Randolph. We're talking to students that are going to go into colleges. I imagine Columbia had its own, even being in the heart of New York City, its own diversity issues. We encourage, SBI encourage a lot of students go to these private liberal arts colleges in upstate New York and other institutions. And it's common that diversity is something that is going to be part of the challenge, part of the mix, part of what's going on. You're going from, black and brown school in the heart of Harlem to probably someplace that's rural. The makeup of the campus is going to be way majority white, probably. You're coming from a black, Latino kind of background. We love part of that dynamic, because that's sort of what so many people go into the workforce and experience. So get that now while you're learning and you're not feeling the pressures of that work environment. What would you say to an alumni of Randolph? They're graduating college, they're headed into the workforce. That they're dealing with these issues. Obviously, you dealt with the racial diversity, being treated differently in the workplace over a large time span. How would you tell people to prepare for it? Obviously, I know you feel incredibly passionate about changing the system, changing the dynamic. I think we have that a little bit in common. I know for me, I had lots of thoughts about different careers, and almost every single one of them was like, I want to go and make a change. I want to take whatever this system is and I want to bend it to my will and make it better than what it is right now. What would you tell somebody?
Well, I'd probably go classic and say, let's talk about Plato's allegory of the cave.
Okay, all right. So you've lost me. So you can explain.
This is a fantastic story. So a bunch of people who are living in a cave, and they're all chained together, and there's a fire that keeps them warm, and the fire casts shadows. So now the people who are in the cave start talking to the shadows as if they're actual people. And one day somebody's chain breaks, and so he escapes. He goes out into the world. He sees that was not real. That wasn't a society. Those weren't real people that were there. And so he rushes back into the cave to tell everybody, here, I have this truth for you. You know what the people in the cave do? They kill him. Because at the end of the day, you have to be very clear that truth has got to be something that people are prepared for. And my standard joke is, Jesus had a pretty good message. Things didn't work out for him, but he had a pretty good message. So before you've decided that there are things that you want to change within an institution, America is funny in that she can make these leaps and bounds and to do these amazing things. But there's a lot of work that went into that. Yeah. We know who Rosa Parks is. Tell me who were the other 10 people who didn't move on the bus. So they got killed. So as much as people would like to make institutional change, you have to have certain credibility in order to do that. You have to understand what's good and bad about the institution.
So kind of take a step back here,
Mhm.
because I mean, I think in watching so many of the films, obviously because of the skin I'm in, I have a different lived experience than so many. But that theme that if you want to change something, often it doesn't work out well. We love to talk up the big personalities. You got your Nelson Mandelas of the
Mhm.
world,
Mhm.
your Martin Luther King, which is a perfect example of not working out well.
Malcolm X,
Malcolm X,
Medgar Evers.
Medgar,
It's there's a long list of people who died for our right to be where we are right now.
So what's the message you're trying to give to somebody? Are you saying don't try to change too much?
No, I'm not. I'm saying there's a reason that people, like, you've never heard of a great Aboriginal surfer from Australia, because the Aborigines know that there's sharks in the water, so they're not trying to test life by getting on a surfboard and being a great surfer. They're like, I'm good. You can do that. It's there's a level of expertise that you need to go ahead and develop. There's patience that you actually need to have, because in the end, if you think about Nelson Mandela, why wasn't there a bloodbath in South Africa? Because they engaged in truth and reconciliation, and that's hard to do. The United States has never done that. So is you're trying to say, isn't it obvious that people are being hurt by this policy?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it might be obvious to you, but how are you going to win people over to your side and then not have the institution make an example of you in the process? So I'm definitely not encouraging anyone to not recognize the truth, but to recognize that truth has 4 stages. First stage, you say to somebody, you shouldn't do that. First is, no, I'm going to do that. I think I know. Second, you really shouldn't do that. It's really bad if you do that. No, I'm going to go ahead and do that. Third time, look, if you keep telling me about this, I'm going to have a problem with you. The 4th stage of truth, if it's obvious, of course I shouldn't have been doing that. But those first 3 stages, a lot can go wrong in those first 3 stages. Don't lose sight of the fact that, if you believe in God, if you believe in some other force, why did they put you here? What mission did you have? Is it not to understand yourself? What do they tell you when you get on an airplane? There's an emergency, that little mask is going to drop. And what do they tell you? Put your mask on first before you try and help the person next to you.
It's been such a big part of the conversation over the last year with the pandemic, with mental health. And I think so many people of color find themselves, particularly in this situation, but wherever you are, this idea that you have to take care of you before you go out and you're protesting, engaging in social change. If you're not personally healthy and personally fulfilled and personally satisfied, everything else becomes so much more challenging,
Absolutely.
so much more difficult.
Absolutely.
All right, so talk to us about last couple of years and what the future holds for Mr. Michael Taylor.
So ultimately, I've been dabbling in different areas of things that I might want to do in retirement. The one area that's coming up more than anything else has been some of my political work. Supporting Dr. Raphael G. Warnock becoming a senator in Georgia, because I lived in Georgia for 3 years. And if there's any one thing that I can absolutely see myself doing is identifying political candidates to support, fundraising, and who knows, maybe even running for office myself, because using Georgia as an example, there are more counties in Georgia than in any state in the United States. And so why do you have so many counties? Well, because that had to do with going back to slavery, and then you change the law from place to place. Because what you wanted to do is, if somebody was trying to get away as a slave, like, you catch them, you punish them, you charge them with their crime, and you send them back to where they were going. So in places like Atlanta, where there are only 3 white judges, you can't say that if you get charged with a crime in the city of Atlanta, that's going to be a race issue because the person may look like you. What you'll find is that if you try and move at night in Atlanta, that is illegal to move at night. You're like, well, why? Why doesn't it make any sense? Well, because it goes back to when you had farms, and if you had somebody moving their farm at night, they would be crossing over somebody else's farm, trampling and things. Now, why is that law still there? It doesn't make any sense. Well, there are a lot of laws that are still there that need to be taken off of the books because those laws were never designed to do anything other than punish certain people. There's work associated with that.
Yeah.
And to me, the politics of today is about understanding why things are the way that they are, and then saying what can you keep and what can you discard, what is not working well, and that's work associated with that. It's not you won the election, you want a gym membership. Okay, get to the gym. Every day you gotta get to the gym.
I love that. Yeah, and I think so many positions and roles are like that. You can. There's some places where you can you don't have to go to the gym. They still give you the membership, right?
Absolutely.
Whether the work is getting done or not. And then there's other places where if you're not in there, it's not happening and people notice. And I think the world is like that in a lot of ways, right? You got certain places where your work is more on display than others. Politicians, certainly, we would love to say that their work is highlighted more, but there's a lot of politicians sleeping through it seems.
Absolutely. And going back to like what to say to somebody, why do we make streets out of asphalt? Why don't we make them out of concrete? They'll last for 10 years because it's a structural inefficiency that allows somebody to be paid every year in order to fix the potholes and then to put more asphalt down. It's a jobs program. So in many ways, when people are screaming about change within society, it's saying, a lot of this stuff wasn't necessarily set up to be efficient. It was set up so that money could be spent. Is the money being spent in your community or in somebody else's community? Who's getting those jobs? Well, now you're having a real conversation. You can be a part of the solution. But I think in many instances, just recognizing that something is wrong and it needs to be changed is 20%. The other, that's your gym membership right there. The other 80% is figuring out an answer, and your answer might change with new information.
Yeah.
That's one thing that we definitely as a society suffer from.
And we don't respond in nuance well as a society.
No. It's rocky. You end with the big win. It doesn't work out that way. You end with a situation that's ongoing, and damn it, you better love the journey.
Yeah, we lose people if it's listen, this is the solution if and if and then this is the solution if and then this is the solution. Can we just have one solution and then we'll rock with that, and that we're not ready for all that complexity. Michael, man, thank you for doing this with me. Who are people that you would love to get in contact with? Who should be somebody that reaches out to you? I'm hopeful that alumni will see this and want to connect with you. I know I got your LinkedIn down below in the YouTube description, off to the side on Facebook. But who would you love to connect with you, and what kind of connections are you trying to make?
Well, I think anybody who's interested in education or has heard anything here that they'd like me to expound more on, anybody who's interested in getting into investing, I would say for you as a parent, this would be true for anybody who graduated from Randolph. Teach your children that the difference is in between an appreciating asset and a depreciating asset. Because at the end of the day, when their birthday comes and you've gotten them all of these wonderful plastic toys that they play with, they're not going to be worth anything 5 years from now. But if you buy them a share of Apple, just one share, and put that in account for them, you start doing that every single year around every single celebration. All of a sudden, when the Dow Jones Industrial Average goes up and you've bought them one of each of those 30 companies, well, they're going to see the account go up. And I say that because the idea of kids, everybody needing to be able to invest in order to retire is a given. That's just there are very few options for people to get pensions and other pieces.
When you talk about lifting folks up and you talk about getting to a place where we're, as a people, just all our different communities, but especially the Black and brown communities, women in general, right, with all the challenges and the gender pay equality gap, the idea that you're building the generational wealth there, that piece of it, because at the end of the day, when you're talking about who's making the laws for who, It's the haves, right? It's the haves, and the have-nots kind of get left behind. So if you want to be in that place where you get to have the property and get to have more of the sway and the say, and I think one of the things that's been sort of eye-opening for me is just saving money. I didn't grow up saving money, and so what you're talking about, being able to be taught that as you're young, and then getting into that habit, having your parents do that. Money certainly isn't the key to happiness, but it does make things a lot easier when you're trying to make choices and influence people. And you want to go and do a protest. It's nice to be able to go out and print out banners at will and that kind of stuff. I mean, it makes things a little bit more fluid. So I love that advice. For folks that are trying to connect with you, LinkedIn.
Definitely on LinkedIn. My Gmail, mitaylor006@hotmail.com. I'm definitely on Instagram. I think it's DJ Hannibal06.
Oh, we got to talk about, so you're DJ still to this day.
Definitely.
So how can somebody see you do what you're doing?
I do have a SoundCloud account, and I'm going to start. I kept saying this for this time. I should start. But I have some things that are posted on SoundCloud. I'll send you the link for that. But that's it's something I do out of.
We got some Randolph alumni. They're definitely into the music, so we got to get the music heads to connect. Yeah,
absolutely. Larry Scott Blackman, whose father was a lead singer, Cameo. Definitely a bunch of guys who spin.
We got
ladies,
some good music roots at Randolph. Thanks for doing this with
Absolutely.
me. All right, I'm gonna play us off. I have this theme. If I can pick this up here. Let's see if I can make this work here. We have a theme song. You might like this. Now, this calls back like the Randolph of the days of concerts. So I don't know how much it's going to drive the reminiscing for you, but it's been fun. Let me see if I can get it going here. I got to get my video piece with it so that I can just play it. But this is the theme song for the show here. Thanks everybody for watching. Stay tuned. If you have, let me see if I can share this so that the sound actually shares on the show.
This is the Alumni Connections Project. We all know Randolph is better than the rest. Even when the rest still got a rep. Randolph Kansas High School.
Thanks everybody. It's a pleasure. I'm gonna let the song play here.
Supported then, stronger together through unity, better together. Let's build the community. Randolph isn't a school or a building. It's a legacy. It's not in your past. It's your identity. So show some pride. Alumni Connections is sponsored and brought to you by SBI, CCPI. SoundDownBusiness.org. SoundDownBusiness.org. The journey doesn't end with graduation and prom. The journey doesn't end with graduation and prom. The journey doesn't end with the journey doesn't end. This is the Alumni Connections Project. This is the Alumni Connections Project. 8th Philip Randolph. 8th Philip Randolph. Randolph.